I begin my remarks today on this Good Shepherd Sunday, I want to draw your attention over to here. In front of the altar. You can't see it, but there's an amaryllis two amaryllis blossoms that have come out of this little rhinoceros planter. All of it given to me by my beloved friend Bernie Honey over here. When we first got here, we would go over and visit, and we would see her amaryllis, and they were in a couple of different pots and whatnot. And I just thought, oh, they're just so beautiful. I'd really never kind of seen them before. And then right as the pandemic, we were beginning to come back from the pandemic. We had a subpar Easter in terms of turnout. And so it was a really tough financial time for us. This was back in, I think, 2021. And so Bernie had given me this amaryllis, and back when it didn't have any blooms on it, and it was just an ugly bulb sticking out of a pot. And I sent a letter out to the whole congregation, and when it had bloomed like this, and the whole thing was that, even though it feels sometimes like life or our church or our businesses or our spiritual life might be this like ugly bulb that's got all these like extra husks on it, and you don't think it's going to live. Maybe it's dead, but it's not. It then comes out of this bulb and it turns into this. And it's just a reminder that this is the resurrection. The tomb kind of looks like the ugly bulb, right? But the amaryllis comes out, and so I bring it out every time this year that these amaryllis bloom, and it just reminds us that we are to have life and have it right. For those of you watching at home, the name of the word of the day is abundantly. All right. So what a vision of beloved community that we have here in the Acts of the Apostles, our reading today. I'm just going to read it for your hearing. Awe came over everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as they had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This is a little snapshot of what it looks like to be a beloved community following in the footsteps of Jesus. Not unlike how things are going here in this moment in time. Let me just give you some examples. Have you been to the St. Patty's Day party that we had? Did you go to that on the 17th of March? Did you celebrate with us? Well, 120 of you did, and it was outrageous. It was so good to be together. Or did you see the spring bloom hats that were on display? Oh my gosh, they were unbelievable. These are little snapshots of what resurrection looks like in this community. And so in John's gospel, Jesus presents himself as the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Now, the sheep know his voice and follow him, and he protects them. As a matter of fact, he says that he is the gate, and through him the sheep enter the safety of the fold and pass through him to the green pastures and the still waters to refresh their soul. You'll remember several years ago when I made the example that this, for example, is a model of a medieval church that had this kind of gate here. And literally, farm animals would roam in and out of the church during Mass, and so they needed something to keep the animals out of the chancel so that they wouldn't eat the Holy Sacrament, right? And they had like a gate, that so you could go in and up out of the chancel. But this is also to represent a sheepfold. right? A sheepfold is something that the shepherd would build, kind of a fence, to keep the flock together at night. And there would be an opening, and that the shepherd himself would lay across the opening, would sleep there, and would literally become the gate so that the sheep couldn't get out and wander off, but also that predators couldn't get in and eat the sheep, right? The cool thing about Jesus talking about himself as the gate is that the sheep can go out and come in when they want to, when they go through the shepherd. And when they go out because there is green pasture and there is still waters. So they go out for nourishment when they choose, but they also come back when they choose, and they're welcomed back into the fold, right? They go out because there are green pastures, there's abundant food, but there's also still waters. Sheep won't eat from waters that are white. They won't eat from rapids. They won't drink from rapids because it's dangerous, and they recognize that. But the good shepherd leads them to the still waters where they can drink and get their fill. Back to my comments here. So the good shepherd knows your name, knows your name, each and every one of us. The question is, do we know his voice? Do we recognize the voice of the shepherd when he speaks? Do we recognize the kingdom of heaven when it comes near? And do we share it with one another? Do we share it with the world? Do we shepherd one another along the way as we follow the good shepherd? Do we shepherd one another? Because we need one another. We need one another to shepherd each other, to share and kindle the experience of living this resurrected life with Jesus. We need each other. Our job in this beloved community is to shepherd and sustain one another, to bear one another in love, to encourage one another, to learn from one another, and support one another in joy as well as in trouble. We need one another to see each other through the gate. And we must serve as shepherds to one another, according to the teaching and example of Jesus. We must shepherd one another. But at the essential first step, we need to be able to recognize the shepherd's voice when he calls, and recognize his kingdom when it comes near. Otherwise, we may follow strangers. I am a proud product of the 1970s and 80s. And so, suffice it to say, television has been a kind of influence in my life. And thank God for it, let me tell you. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street gave a little white kid from Bakersfield, California, a window into a big, wide, beautiful world. The world was bigger than I knew. It was bigger than the world around me. It was more colorful, more diverse, and more beautiful. From caring and thoughtful folks like Fred Rogers and the Children's Television Workshop, I was invited into the big work of caring for and loving this big, beautiful world in the name of love and compassion, inclusion. It was my first introduction to thinking globally and acting locally, right? Transforming the world with love-spreading difference-making, starting with my neighborhood, starting with my block, and starting with my neighbors. I am in part who I am today because of the teachings of Jesus and Fred Rogers and Big Bird and Mr. Hooper and beloved Maria. They have been some of the most influential shepherds in my life. Jesus teaches us to bear one another in love, which means to actively seek the best good for our brothers and sisters. That was the message of Fred Rogers and Sesame Street. Love one another as we have first been loved. That was the message. Support one another in being the most you that you can possibly be. That was the message of Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I love you just the way you are, was his message. Jerry Springer, who developed the mid-90s shock reality talk show format of human exploitation, absurdity, and othering, died this week. He left us a legacy that endures and continues to shape our national and cultural landscape today. It was, in large part, Jerry Springer, whose daily afternoon talk show piped into American households just in time for children to get home from school, and adults alike to sit back and consume the basest, most vulgar human impulses right on their television screen, right in their living room. His brand of tabloid television made mainstream and normalized the destructive cultural and social forces that rip at the fabric of our political, cultural, and social lives today. Those are the seeds of division that were sown so many years ago and watered throughout the decades. The Jerry Springer Show, which peaked in 1998 as the most watched daytime television show in America, nearly 7 million viewers a day, made way for what we today call reality TV, which, by the way, folks, as you know, I'm sure, has nothing to do with reality. Certainly not the reality that we long to see in the world, right? It has everything to do, though, with greed and exploitation and deception. It has everything to do with stripping our fellow human beings of their dignity. Jane Coaston, New York Times opinion staff writer, observed in her article this weekend, "We are all guests on the Jerry Springer Show now." She writes, "Back then, the audience could enjoy or shudder in horror at the spectacle of their fellow Americans behaving badly from the safe remove of a television screen, just as the audience can now watch a similar spectacle on reality TV. But the social media era has smashed that barrier between performative awfulness and its audience. Mr. Springer's more insidious legacy is that we've all been lured through the glass, and just like his guests, we have been egged on to perform our cruelest, worst, most vice-signaling behavior, all while gawking at the same behavior in others. With the Jerry Springer Show, we are still just the audience, but now we are both the audience and the guests. Polluting, poisoning, normalizing the voice of the stranger. The Good Shepherd calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. There are many voices out there in this big, beautiful, and complex world today. There are many strangers out there vying for our attention and for our fealty. These strangers have taught us to hate one another, to distrust one another, and exploit one another for maximum gain. This is how it is when we follow strangers' voices. The Good Shepherd, Jesus, teaches us to bear one another in love, to bear one another with compassion, and to be shepherds for one another. Am I my brother's keeper? You bet I am. Am I my sister's keeper? You bet your boots I am. Learning to follow Jesus' voice and seek out his green pastures and still waters is the most important work of our lives. So we must ask ourselves, as we watch and consume our social media feeds, as we watch and consume our television, as we watch and consume our novels and all that we consume, we must ask, do I hear his voice in that? Do we know how to follow him when we hear it? And do we share it with the world that is so desperate for his good news? And when they ask, will you be a good neighbor? Can you tell them how to get to greener pastures and stiller waters? St. Patrick's, I believe you can, and I believe you do. But stay tuned.